Ladies, do you sometimes find it challenging to enjoy sex? Do you struggle with a low libido? Do you sometimes feel frustrated because you try your hardest, but you never seem to enjoy the sex that you're experiencing? I want to tell you it's not your fault, and I also want to say it's nobody's fault. But the thing is, when women don't experience deeply pleasurable sex, the kind of mind-blowing sex that releases a heady mix of chemicals pouring through our bodies, we eventually just reject sex completely. And here's the thing. There is a well-known phenomenon in Western heterosexual sex, a gender disparity in sexual satisfaction. It's called the orgasm gap, which basically acknowledges and seems to accept that a very high proportion of men in relationships will orgasm every time they have sex, and that equally a very high proportion of women in the same relationships will not orgasm during sex. And funnily enough, the gender that is not orgasming every time they have sex is also the gender that has growing libido problems, that suffers from a disinterest in sex, that feels broken in some way. Do you really think we can be that surprised? I guess if you buy into the patriarchal model that says that sex is male entitlement and that it's women's role to just give men the sex that they need in exchange for whatever they get, then maybe you might be surprised by female refusal or women going off sex. But I think most of us now desire equal, loving sexual relationships inside equal, loving partnership. We don't like to imagine the fact that women are enduring sex for male pleasure. And yet, that's exactly what's happening all around us all the time. Because of our shared social ignorance about female pleasure, female sexuality, female desires and wants, women, far too many women, are having sex that feels like a chore, having sex that they endure, having sex merely in exchange for something else, having sex with a timer on the side of the bed that pings after 10 minutes and they say, that's enough, get off me. This is the experience of far too many women still. Basically, it's been such a long time since we have truly valued female sexual pleasure that many women don't even know what it's like. Naomi Wolf in Vagina, I really recommend you read this book, writes about an experiment on rats which really brilliantly illustrates that the experiment was done in order to illustrate or to investigate this connection between this pleasure that females experience from sex with then their desire to have more sex. So female rats and male rats were placed in specially designed cages. The females had access whenever they wanted to the male side of the cage through a little doorway, but the doorway was too little for any of the males to enter the female side, so the females were at choice and could access males for sex whenever they wanted to. And then the females were divided into two groups. You had group A, which had their pleasure receptors in the brain inhibited temporarily, and group B that were left intact. And then the females were left to their own devices and allowed to seek out the sex that they wanted. And sex happened. The scientists observed group A carefully, and maybe first few occasions sex happened. And then they noticed that the group A rats became less and less interested. First it was less interested in sex. Then it was they removed themselves from sex. Then it was they attacked any males that attempted to have sex with them. And eventually they completely socially isolated. They just stayed on their side of the cage. They didn't engage with any of the other rats socially, and rats are pretty social creatures. And they stopped engaging with anything simply because they weren't experiencing pleasure. By contrast, group B female rats were having a splendid time. Female rats blessedly grow up without the sexual shaming that female humans grow up with, and in their sexual innocence, They were very assertive, they were very sassy, and they sought out more sex and yet more sex, and they just never stopped kind of seeking out sex. So you had a very good contrast between what happens with the group that don't experience pleasure and the group that were experiencing lots of pleasure. I absolutely love the story. I love what it illustrates about female sexuality. I love the fact that there are scientists who are now doing research into female pleasure and how female pleasure affects our behaviour. And I also just love the reading about how much fun these innocent, liberated, sexy rats in Group B were. They had so much fun with the males that obviously had a good time too. You see, when women experience sexual pleasure, we want more sex. We love sex. We're a highly sexual creature. But sadly, and I would say kind of almost criminally, when women don't experience pleasure, we lose our sexual appetite. We don't want it. Like the rats in Group A, we lose our libidos. And we lose our libidos not just for sex, but for life, for socialising, for engaging. We lose our confidence. We don't want to partake in the connection with other people, with other creatures. We become isolated and alone, invisible, unseen. We lose all of our confidence, our sense of ourselves. Naomi Wolf coined the phrase, or created the term, I don't know how to say it. She used the term vaginal depression. She used this term to explain how women who live their lives without turned-on, pulsating vaginas live lives that are greyer, less meaningful, certainly less joyful. And these women, unlike the rats in Group B, who are out there having blissful, incredibly fun, confident, joyful experience, the rats in Group A, like the women who aren't experiencing pleasure from sex, are just not experiencing pleasure in life. You see, orgasm nourishes us. The chemicals that are released with orgasm make us feel completely amazing. They make us feel amazing in the moment, and they nourish our bodies and build our confidence. They even our brains grow and expand with the chemicals of orgasm. And the orgasm gap matters because without the pleasure and the joy and the heady chemicals that come with orgasm, sex becomes a violation. If our bodies aren't awash with pleasure, the moment of penetration, the act of penetration, becomes a harmful act. Every time, as women, like the rats in Group A, every time we endure penetration, experience penetration without the accompanying orgasmic pleasure and bliss filling our bodies, it builds up the cellular memory in our bodies that sex is a horrible experience rather than a joyful one. And although us women don't have little perspex doorways that are too small for men to fit through, we find other ways to keep ourselves separate and disconnected and withdrawn from the males in our lives. So you see, women who have faced too many sexual experiences that do not light their bodies up go off sex. When we don't experience pleasure, we stop wanting the sex that's on offer. And this is why the orgasm gap matters in every single relationship. We can remove the orgasm gap. We can ensure that all sex is pleasurable for every person involved. To do so, we need to rethink how we do sex. The male-centric model, the one that we've all been conditioned into, the one that we're all programmed to do, has to be consigned to history. It has to just be thrown in the bin. We need to develop a femme-centric model of sex that puts female pleasure right back at the heart of sexuality. And I can hear some voices at the back of the room saying, yeah, but won't a femme-centric model just create the same problem the other way round? Isn't a femme-centric model going to harm men? And I'm going to say, those male rats that were enjoying the female Group B rats, you think they had a problem with female pleasure? Do you think they were complaining about their happy, sexy, sassy rats? I don't think so. I've never heard a man complain about women having too much pleasure from sex. It just doesn't happen. If you're ready to feel more pleasure and joy in your body and experience a bliss of orgasm, but you're not yet sure how to start, and you want some help and some guidance along the way, why not book a complimentary call with me? It's completely confidential, and it's an opportunity. The idea is that we have a chance to get acquainted with one another. And you can also sign up to my newsletter, which the link is in the comments below, so that you hear from me on a regular basis. I hope you found this week's video helpful, and I hope that the female rats in Group B have inspired you to seek out more pleasure in your sex life. Take care. Bye now.